The Galactic Empire had known peace, but only the kind dictated by its own brutal laws. Ukaris Prime, a neutral planet known for its diplomatic neutrality, had long stood as a fragile bridge between the Empire and the fractured systems beyond its reach. It was a world of treaties and whispered negotiations, a place where war could be averted with the right words. And no one wielded words as skillfully as Avelia Kale. Draped in the formal robes of her office, Avelia stood before the delegation from the Empire, her sharp eyes scanning their rigid expressions. The leader, a man named Lord Vecron, carried himself with the measured arrogance of a man who had never considered the possibility of failure. He spoke with an air of disinterest, offering vague reassurances while his soldiers lined the hallways with an unspoken threat. Avelia had spent years perfecting the art of negotiation, diffusing conflicts before they ignited into war. Yet, tonight, the air held a tension she could not ignore. The Empire was not here to discuss peace. They were here to make a statement. Outside the hall, Kaida Kale lingered in the shadows. She had never been one for politics. While her mother worked with words, Kaida trained in silence, learning the language of the hunt. From the time she could walk, she had been drawn to the discipline of combat. Stealth, precision, the patience of a predator. She had spent her youth mastering weapons both primitive and advanced, her skills honed in the quiet spaces her mother never saw. It was not rebellion. It was instinct. The first explosion shattered the night. The palace doors blew inward, and before Avelia could react, the soldiers who had once stood as her audience drew their weapons. The massacre began in an instant. Diplomats fell where they stood, cut down before they could flee. The Empire had no intention of negotiating. They had come to erase Ukaris Prime from the galactic stage. Avelia did not beg. She did not scream. She simply met Vecron's gaze as he raised his weapon. "You think this will silence us?" she said. Her voice was calm, unbroken. Vecron smirked before pulling the trigger. Kaida had seen death before, but never like this. Never so sudden, so absolute. The woman who had guided entire civilizations with her words was gone in an instant, and the Empire had turned its gaze to the rest of Ukaris Prime. She did not hesitate. Instinct drove her. She moved through the chaos, past the bodies, past the burning halls. The Empire was thorough. They would leave no survivors. But they had underestimated her. The hunt began that night. In the days that followed, whispers spread through the outer colonies. High-ranking Imperial officers found themselves targeted in ways they could not predict. A captain executed in his own chambers, his guards unaware of how the assassin had entered. A supply convoy reduced to ruins, its cargo left untouched. There was no pattern, no demands, only a creeping, relentless elimination. The Empire did not know her name. Not yet, but they felt her presence. Kaida had abandoned her old life. She moved through the systems like a shadow, studying the Empire's weaknesses. She adapted, learning to use their own technology against them, combining it with the ancient arts of the hunt. She did not fight like a soldier. Soldiers relied on formations, on orders. She was something older, something they could not anticipate. And when she struck, she left only one message behind. For Avelia, Vecron was the first to understand. The diplomat's death had not silenced Ukaris Prime. It had unleashed something far worse than rebellion. It had woken the Huntress. Kaida moved like a ghost through the Empire's crumbling grip, a predator carving through the ranks of those who had orchestrated her mother's murder. Fear had begun to fester in the hearts of Imperial officers, an emotion they were unaccustomed to. The once mighty leaders of conquest now traveled with doubled security, their eyes darting over their shoulders in search of a shadow they could not see. The hunt had begun in vengeance, but now it was something more, a systematic dismantling of the Empire's power. Her name was unknown to them, but her actions were unmistakable. Officers vanished. Supply chains collapsed. Entire battalions found themselves leaderless, their commanders executed with precision that defied logic. Kaida was not waging a war. Wars were fought with fleets and armies, with strategy and open combat. She fought like the primal hunters of old, striking in the dead of night, ensuring no trace remained beyond the message she carved into the bodies of the fallen. For Avelia, the Empire scrambled for control. Lord Vecron, once assured of his absolute dominance, now found himself entangled in a battle he could not understand. He had expected uprisings, rebellions led by weak-willed diplomats seeking to reclaim their lost sovereignty. He had prepared for war, for sieges, for drawn-out battles waged between forces of equal strength. But he had not prepared for her. He tightened his grip on the Empire's remaining forces, deploying ruthless enforcers to seek out the assassin. Bounty hunters, mercenaries, and cybernetic trackers were sent after the specter who haunted them. They followed the bodies, the rumors, the carefully planted false trails she left behind. Some came closer than she had expected. But she had spent her life preparing for this. They hunted her, but she was always the better predator. She was not alone. The Empire's reign had forged more enemies than it had allies, and as Kaida's name spread through whispered channels, others began to answer the call. Exiled warriors, defected Imperial officers, rogue AI seeking vengeance against their creators. All gravitated toward the storm she had created. They did not seek to control her. They simply followed, drawn by the inevitability of what was coming. The Empire's grip was failing. Kaida struck deeper, crippling their war efforts, severing their lines of control one by one. The worlds that had once bowed in fear now rose in defiance. She watched from the shadows as the seeds of rebellion took root, knowing that the Empire's destruction would not come solely from her hand. She had become the catalyst, but the galaxy itself had chosen to rise. Vecron saw it unraveling, but he refused to yield. His desperation led him to a final gambit. He would draw her out, force her into the open. If he could not find her, he would make her come to him. The Imperial homeworld, once untouchable, became his fortress. He gathered his forces, surrounded himself with the last remnants of his unbroken military. It was a challenge, a silent dare thrown into the void. Kaida answered. She had spent her life in the shadows, striking from the dark. But this time she would not hunt. She would not stalk. This time, she would walk through the Empire's front gates. The Imperial homeworld burned. Kaida had always struck from the shadows, a ghost that dismantled the Empire piece by piece. But now the time for patience had ended. She walked through the chaos she had sown, her every step carrying the weight of vengeance. The once pristine spires of the capital were shattered, the streets choked with fire and bodies. The rebellion had begun, but this was not their war to win. This was hers. Vecron's final stronghold loomed in the distance, a fortress of cold steel and desperation. The Empire had once ruled with absolute authority, but fear had infected them now. Soldiers patrolled in tight formations, their eyes frantic as they searched for an enemy who had already doomed them. Kaida did not avoid them. She cut through them with ruthless efficiency, her blade finding gaps in their armor, her shots silent and precise. She did not fight alone. The forces she had gathered, exiles, rebels, defectors, pushed through the city, forcing the Empire's last defenders into retreat. They were not her army. They did not fight for her. They fought because she had given them something the Empire never could: purpose. The fortress doors loomed ahead, sealed against the chaos outside. It would not stop her. She moved through the wreckage of the city's defenses, hacking through the last of the guards before setting her sights on the structure that housed the man responsible for everything. Explosives planted at key points, a countdown initiated. The doors would fall, and with them, the last illusion of the Empire's invincibility. Vecron was waiting. He had abandoned his soldiers, retreating into the highest tower of his citadel, surrounded by the last remnants of his loyal guard. He had prepared for this moment, believing that within the walls of his palace, he would have the advantage. He was wrong. The doors fell with a thunderous crash, and Kaida stepped into the heart of the dying Empire. The guards moved to intercept her, but they were nothing to her now. Her blades carved through them like they were already dead, her movements precise, unyielding. She did not stop until only one man remained. Vecron stood at the top of the grand stairway, his once imposing presence reduced to something hollow. He had ruled through fear, through power, through the belief that he could never be touched. But he had not understood the consequences of his actions. He had killed a diplomat, never imagining that the daughter left behind would be something far worse than a rebel. "You think this changes anything?" His voice was strained, but he tried to hold his composure. "The Empire is eternal." Qaida leveled her weapon at him, her expression unreadable. "So was my mother." He reached for a hidden blade, but she was faster. A single shot echoed through the chamber, and Lord Vecron, ruler of 1,000 conquered worlds, fell lifeless at her feet. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the rebellion surged forward, taking the last strongholds of imperial control. But Qaida did not stay to watch. She had never fought for a throne, never sought to rule. Her war had ended the moment Vecron drew his last breath. She vanished before the victory celebrations began, slipping into the void beyond the Empire's ruins. The galaxy would remember her as the shadow that had ended an empire. Some would call her a hero, others a monster, but Qaida Kale had never cared for names. She had been a daughter, she had been a hunter, and now she was free. Since the story was structured into 3 sections with a satisfying conclusion, adding a 4th section requires a natural continuation. Here's an extended final act that deepens Qaida's journey beyond vengeance and explores the cost of her actions. The Empire had fallen, but the war did not end. Qaida Kale had walked away from the wreckage of the imperial throne, slipping into the vast silence of the outer systems. She had spent her life hunting, moving from shadow to shadow, striking down those responsible for her mother's death. Now that they were gone, the galaxy whispered of peace. But peace was fragile. The void left in the Empire's wake had become a battleground. The rebellion, once united under a single purpose, fractured as soon as victory was assured. Warlords claimed entire sectors, former imperial governors clung to whatever power they could salvage, and the people who had suffered under tyranny found themselves caught in a new kind of struggle, one of lawlessness, betrayal, and desperation. Qaida watched from the fringes, unseen but not uninvolved. She had never wanted to lead. She had never fought for thrones or banners. But the power vacuum her war had created could not be ignored. She had torn down the Empire, but she had not built anything in its place. And now others sought to take what remained. She found herself drawn to the distant world of Zyros 9, a barren wasteland once used as an imperial weapons facility. Now it had become the seat of a new power, one led by a man named Valsis Vane. A former admiral in the Empire, Vane had survived the collapse by carving out his own dominion. He ruled not through fear alone, but through calculated brutality, ensuring that no one questioned his claim. His forces were remnants of the old Empire, soldiers who refused to surrender, mercenaries who had no allegiance beyond their next paycheck. Qaida had left war behind, but Zyros 9 called to her, not because of Vane's claim to power, but because of the rumors that had reached her ears. Avelia Kale's name had not died with her. Vane had made a show of executing former diplomats, scientists, and strategists, anyone who had served the old order but refused to pledge loyalty to his rule. Among them was a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Avelia, a prisoner held deep within the fortress of Zyros 9. It was impossible. Qaida had seen her mother die. She had watched the execution with her own eyes, had felt the weight of that moment carve itself into her soul. But the whispers would not leave her mind. And so the hunt began again. Zyros 9 was a fortress in every sense. The planet's surface was a hostile landscape of jagged obsidian ridges and violent electrical storms, a natural defense against any would-be attackers. The stronghold itself was built into the largest canyon, a labyrinth of tunnels reinforced with layers of energy shielding and automated turrets. Vane had built his empire with the paranoia of a man who knew what it meant to be hunted. Qaida did not approach as an assassin. She came as a storm. She moved through the outer perimeter like a shadow, cutting down sentries with silent precision, slipping through security checkpoints before alarms could be raised. The deeper she went, the more the weight of her past settled upon her. Every corridor felt like the ruins of the empire she had already destroyed. The prison chambers were buried beneath the fortress, a network of steel cells illuminated by the cold glow of containment fields. The air was thick with the scent of rust and ozone, the quiet hum of machinery drowning out the distant sounds of battle above. She found the cell easily. The woman inside was gaunt, her frame draped in tattered fabric, her wrists bound in energy restraints. Her face was half hidden beneath unkempt hair, but when she lifted her gaze, Kaida felt the breath leave her lungs. It was not Avelia, but the resemblance was uncanny. The same sharp features, the same calculating stare, though dulled by exhaustion. Clone, perhaps, or something worse. The woman studied Kaida with an expression that was neither relief nor fear. "You're real," she said finally. "I thought they were lying." Kaida's voice was low, steady. "Who are you?" "Celis Kale," the woman replied. Kaida froze. The name twisted something deep within her. She had no siblings, no family beyond the mother she had lost. But the certainty in Celis's voice was unshakable. "I don't know you," Kaida said, though she felt the lie in her own words. Celis offered a faint, tired smile. "No, you don't. But I know you, and I know why they kept me alive." A sound echoed through the chamber. Footsteps, armored boots striking metal. The guards had caught her scent. Kaida moved fast, slicing through the control panel to disable the restraints. Celis fell forward, catching herself with shaking hands. "We don't have time," Kaida said, pulling her to her feet. "Can you fight?" Celis exhaled sharply. "Not like you, but I'll manage." They moved together, navigating the prison corridors as alarms blared overhead. Kaida dispatched the first wave of guards with brutal efficiency, her blade cutting through armor and flesh before they could raise their weapons. Celis stayed close, her steps unsteady but determined. They reached the exit just as the fortress trembled beneath the impact of orbital bombardment. Someone was attacking Zyros 9 from above. Perhaps the rebellion, perhaps another warlord looking to claim Vane's territory. It didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was escaping before the fortress collapsed. They reached the surface as ships filled the sky, streaks of plasma fire raining down upon the stronghold. Kaida pulled Celis toward the edge of the canyon, where a stolen shuttle waited, its engines humming with impatient energy. As they ascended into the dark expanse of space, Kaida looked back one last time. Zyros 9 was burning, another empire crumbling under the weight of its own ambition. Celis sat beside her, silent for a long moment before speaking. "You think this ends with Vane?" Kaida tightened her grip on the controls. "No," she admitted. "It never does." The empire was gone, but its shadows remained. There would always be another tyrant, another war, another battle waiting on the horizon. Kaida had been a hunter, an avenger, a force of reckoning. But as the stars stretched out before her, she wondered what came next. For the first time in her life, she did not know the answer.